Hello YouTube, it's your boy Mike, and I'm coming at you again with another video. And today's video is called "Will My Foreign Bride Leave Me once she enters the U.S.?" And this is a good question that comes up a lot of times when people kind of discuss whether or not they should bring their girlfriend and wife to the United States. Um, a lot of fears people have is that once she leaves her natural environment, comes to the U.S., she's going to lose a lot of her femininity and also a lot of her submissive nature because of just the toxic environment in the U.S. and also just all the media encouragement to rebel against men. And as we know, the matrix in the U.S. is in general typically anti-male. So a lot of men worry, after going overseas, meeting women, getting a girlfriend, that kind of thing, that good relationship they have is going to kind of start to rot once they reach the U.S. soil. So I just want to kind of speak on that a little bit and kind of go a little bit in detail. Me myself, I personally have a girlfriend in Colombia, and while I'm there in Colombia, she's doing things for me. She's cooking for me. She buys me gifts, this kind of thing. And so, one would think, okay, well, United States, a lot of times, a lot of women kind of think that they're the prize in the United States. So will, in many cases, will the person that you care for, will they suddenly have this change of mind once they get here? So few things you need to consider as well. Um, Most of the women in a lot of these other countries, they grew up in a culture where, in many cases, the male is the prize. The women generally do lots of catering to the male. They cook. Sometimes they cook even for like their brothers, and they typically do a lot of housework and that kind of thing. You got to also consider the economies there are not the best, and there's not that many jobs. So many times, the man is the breadwinner generally in the family, and the women kind of grow up in that culture through movies, music, and just dating in general. So they kind of have that perspective in their mind of how of how relationships should work, and they kind of respect traditional roles. Versus in the U.S., especially in some communities, we have a very high single motherhood. Uh, the single motherhood is out of control in many of the community. So a lot of times the women are growing up, there's no father in the home, there's no men around. It's mostly just women running things. So a lot of times the women grow up with this, like a lot of things that the man would normally do for them. They've kind of learned how to they've kind of, in a twisted way, kind of done it on their own. And they kind of, and that in addition to all the incentives that the government gives them, such as, housing, they help them get, jobs and that kind of thing. So it kind of, in a sense, it kind of pushes the male out of the house and kind of puts them in a position where they feel like they can kind of survive without the male. They don't really need the male's protection. We have the police, that kind of thing. Versus in other countries, the police are not that dependable. So, as an extra bonus, the extra bonus of having a man is that he can kind of protect you, keep you safe, and your incomes together can kind of get you in a decent neighborhood where there's not a lot of crime. Because in those countries, a lot of times, sometimes the police are even working with criminals and that kind of thing. So you kind of got to fend for yourself. So versus in the U.S., although the police are pretty bad, as far as like police brutality, that kind of thing. But for the most part, if they want to solve a crime, in many cases they do a decent job. Their close rate on cases is pretty high in comparison to some of the other countries, especially in Latin America. You also got to consider in Latin America, there's a thing, especially in El Salvador, called femicide, in which women are being killed left and right. They're finding bodies being buried and that kind of thing. So it makes women very fearful. So in many cases, they're really, really looking for a guy that can provide some type of security. So in that sense, there's at least some type of value in being under a man's leadership and having him cover you. So that being said, now we got to consider once that woman leaves and then you bring her to the U.S., like what's going to be her mindset? Well, there's a few things you got to consider as well. It also depends on what part of the U.S. If you're taking her to a big city like Chicago, Miami, New York, something like that, you got to consider that. You also got to consider the age of the woman you're bringing. If you bring a young girl and she's like in her early 20s, and you're a guy and you're like older, 40, 50, that kind of thing, it may be some issues because as she's in the big city, she sees all the girls are out, they're going to the beach. There's gonna be lots of guys approaching her and that kind of thing. She may get a little and not here's the thing, not initially, but she may get a little like somewhat bored, feel like she's maybe missing out. But here's the other thing you got to consider. A lot of times the women from these other countries, they don't really speak the language. So the biggest thing is once they come here, it's not like even when guys are approaching them and they see other girls as well, they don't really, for many cases, they don't speak their language unless it's like Spanish and you're like Miami or some parts of New York where people speak Spanish as well. But you also got to consider that they don't really know anybody there. You're like their only friend. You're the only person they can really hanging out with. So even though they see other young people doing things, it's not like they're just gonna run off and go hang out with those people unless you haven't been vetting the woman well, and they'll say like she's trying to con you, like she has family that's actually there, and then she kind of, you know, plays like she's interested in you only to get to U.S. to run off with her family. But in many cases, as in my previous video has said, that's generally not how they're gonna. If they want to kind of scam you, that's generally not how it works. Generally, when I hear about people getting scammed like that, it's generally people who have met these foreign women within the United States, and these are women who are in the United States in danger of being deported, so they're just looking for somebody they can marry. They already have family, already pretty much rooted here. So once they get that green card, you marry them. Of course, they, in some cases they just run off. Versus a woman, even a Spanish woman from a Latin American country, she has no family in the U.S. She has no stake there. So once she comes there with you, you're like the only person she really can hang out with and talk to, and she's dependent on you to kind of show her around, help her with the language, help her go shopping, all the regular things. Because for the first 2 years she can't work, so everything is dependent on you. So you got to consider that. So even though she comes to the U.S., consider that she still has to be under your leadership for those 2 years. It's not like she just drops here. Oh, I'm in the U.S. I'm off. It's not going to work like that. She's going to need a lot of direction, and I really feel that's what's going to kind of keep you guys together. So even though she comes here, you don't have to worry about that. Once she's here for those 2 years, as long as the marriage is legit and hasn't been a fraud since the beginning, and as I told you before in my previous video, I've kind of given you some tips on how to vet the woman. I'm also going to do another video on how to vet these women and that kind of thing. But if you vetted her properly, and you can, and you can kind of through testing and testing her, you can kind of sense that she's really into you. It's very unlikely that as soon as she hits the ground in the U.S., she's just going to start running off or become disinterested. It's not going to happen just because of the fact, as I told you before, is that she's going to need your leadership for the next 2 years. And and a lot of women in general, pretty smart. Like if she knows she's gonna have to be on you for 2 years, she's not just gonna put it this way, a lot of the foreign women, they already kind of know this. So for her to kind of fraud, hoodwink somebody, and then has to go to their country and be with this guy who she doesn't like, and they have to fake it for like 2 years, it's gonna be pretty difficult. So a lot of them are not gonna do that. So anyway, those 2 years, like I said, you're gonna be pretty protected. Because the thing is, you also got to consider where you live in, because that's if you live in the city. But if you live in the suburb, you're not gonna really have that much of a problem, because suburban area, most of the people are kind of going in the city to hang out, go to the beaches, that kind of thing. But you're in like a quieter suburban area. It's very unlikely that you're gonna have to worry about culture getting her so much, because the thing you might be considering is like the television shows, the news, and that kind of thing. But as I said before, consider that in many cases, she doesn't know the language that well. In her mind, she still has the movies from her country still going through her mind. She's watching Netflix, which in many cases has shows that have developed in other countries. So the culture there in those countries are a whole lot different. It's not going to be the same. And just to add to that, if you look at the marriage rates of U.S. citizens that marry foreigners, it's pretty high. I want to say it was at about 80% success rate. And on average, in general, marriage in general, just between U.S. citizens is about, I think it was 8 to 9 years. That's U.S. citizens. But now consider the fact that the marriage rate is about 50-60% success. But these type of marriages have an 80% rate. So even though 8 to 9 years might be the average for American, but since you've married a foreign woman who comes from a culture that still believes in traditional roles, I believe the probability is higher that it's going to go way beyond like 9 years, maybe even further than that. But me in general, I'll just feel like they just say like I married a woman and marriage went to 9, 10, 11 years. I feel like I got a really, really good run, out of that marriage. And just consider the fact that if you've been able to find a woman willing to marry you within another country, you now have a formula of how to find women, how to find a girlfriend, how to find a wife. And all you have to do really is just replicate that same process again. If you also consider that in many cases, as men get older, we become more in value. We start to make more money, and there's more women. Our options become greater, especially if you go to countries such as Thailand and Philippines, where women don't mind dating men with a large age gap. If you watch the show like 90 Day Fiance, this guy on there, I think he was about 58 years old. He dated a woman that was about 20 years old. So there's about talking almost like a 40-year difference. She had no problem with it. She married him. Everything was fine. So what I'm saying is, the biggest thing you probably need to worry about as far as the marriage is just getting raped in court. A lot of times I hear about people losing half of their possessions, losing the house, gotta pay alimony, and it almost might, break you. So you might just have to, so you need to really study the laws, in your state and just really know, yeah, just really study your laws before you go ahead and make the decision on getting married. But yeah, I would say, for the first few years of your marriage to a foreign woman, I don't really think it's gonna be that big of a deal. As long as you vetted her property, she seems pretty interested. A lot of times, like I said, the biggest thing is what people give their attention to and their money to, that's what they really love. Just ask yourself, has she made herself available to you? Does she respond to your text really well? Has she, bought you gifts? All these kind of things. You just need to really make sure that you really have your hooks in, and she's really under your leadership. And if that's the case, I myself wouldn't really stress bringing that type of woman to the U.S. It just may be, for example, if you fall on hard times, or you live in an area such as like the inner city where there's lots and lots going on, or if you just happen to get married to a woman that's very extroverted. She likes going out all the time. She likes going to clubs. Then it may be a little problem, only because at some point she's going to start having friends, and then their influence around her, plus all the thirsty simps in the country, trying to approach your woman. But again, if you live out in the suburbs with not that much interaction, you got a woman that's generally like a somewhat of a housewife. She likes staying home. She likes cooking for you. And in many cases, maybe she's somewhat introverted. She likes being under you. I really don't think it'll be that much of an issue. So what I want to really say to you is, I would say, don't really stress it. Just kind of, if you really want to bring it back to the States, I would say go ahead and make that leap. Stay in a decent place, maybe the suburbs. Um, and make sure you vetted the woman properly. Make sure she's the type of woman that wants to settle down. She's into you. And she doesn't like going to clubs and go out all the time and that kind of thing. If you do that, that's fine. Now, if it's a different type of woman, like I said, it's a woman that likes to party. She likes to go out. She's somewhat of, I would say, of like a sugar baby, that type of thing. If it's not that type of woman, I wouldn't bring her necessarily to the States, because obviously, as I said before, she's not that much into you. The relationship is almost somewhat financial. In that case, you may want to just keep her there, just here and there every few months. When you want to take a trip, you go visit her there, spend a few days with her, and and some other girls as well. So it really depends on where you at in your life, if you really decide to get married again. But I don't want to spend too much time on this video. That's all I have to say about that. Until next time, YouTube, this is your boy Mike, aka the traditional woman lover, signing off.